Hari Kirtan. That is the applied or the appropriate type of tapasya to be engaged in by one and all in the present day. And if we can simply have that actual sambandha gyan and harinam, then avideya prayojan, it will happen very smoothly, very beautifully, very nicely. So if we find some friction, some slackening, some various other things in our attempt at bhajan, then we have to conclude, I have not heard about Hari. I cannot understand who he is. That has not actually penetrated through the layers of illusion that I live in. And if only I could do so, if I could have a moment of clarity, if I could hear for a minute who was Hari, then his name would never leave my lips. Thoughts of him would never leave my mind. Feeling for him would never leave my heart. He is so extraordinary, right? Atmaramascha munayo nirgranti apiyo rukrame kurvantya haitu kim bhakti mitam bhuto guno Hari. Hari is such, he has such qualities that even those who are Atmaram, even those who may be fully satisfied, according to their estimation, by anything else. We can say Atma means anything. Of course, there are 7 meanings of Atma, and Mahaprabhu gave much detailed analysis of this in his discussion in Varanasi. But in a broad sense, it means this. Atma means the body, which means the senses, which means the objects of perception of the senses, which means just about anything in the world. Whatever you may be satisfied in, whatever layer of experience, at whatever degree of consciousness, it's irrelevant. This is the point that Bhagavatam wants to make. Whatever satisfaction, whatever pleasure, whatever love, joy, hopes, whatever you hold dear, whatever it is, it's irrelevant. Not in a rude way, not in a demeaning way, but in a very soft but very firm, deep way. If it's not Hari, it's irrelevant. Because if it's not absolute, it's relative. And if it's relative, it's not absolute. In other words, it's not ultimately satisfying to you. It's not ultimately going to fulfill you.
But you said that if one doesn't have this devotional service in one's heart, then one has not heard of Hari. I was thinking of the example, of Gopakumar, that he's going through so many different levels of experience until he ultimately gets to Goloka Vrindavan, where he's personally welcomed by Krishna. So he's an exalted soul, obviously. But he goes through so many different levels of experience, and before he gets to that highest plane. And of course, he doesn't fit in anywhere. He goes to Vaikuntha, and he's shouting, "Hey Hari, hey Gopal," and they tell him, "Please, we don't address Vaikuntha or Vishnu in that way. So they're too informal." Then they discuss where he should be sent next. Maybe to Dwarka. No. He won't fit in there either. Send him directly to Goloka Vrindavan, where he's welcomed by Krishna. Well, why then there's a consideration of him going through different levels of experience. So maybe the jiva soul has to go through different levels of perception and experience before he actually can awaken that.
He's yearning and seeking. It's not a passive process on his part. In other words, he's not just being transferred from here to here to here.
No.
He's looking for Krishna. He's looking for his friend. And so he's being drawn along in that way. It's not a passive thing that all of a sudden he's going from level to level.
Well, Srila Govindamar said through bhakti you can go on the elevator to the highest level. That's also possible. But there's an example there in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita of someone going through so many different spheres of influence, you could say.
Well, I would just, if I can go back to the theme, so I was in the middle of the Atmarama verse, and the point being that Hari has such qualities that whatever we may be satisfied with otherwise, we will be irresistibly drawn to him. And whatever other interest, whatever other satisfaction we had, it will be eclipsed to the extent that it will be hard to remember that there was any appeal in that at all before. And thus, to come in connection with that Lord will produce this irreversible change in us. And to hear about him is what facilitates that process. And hearing about him is itself divine grace. Sure, so Prabhu was mentioning this verse in the beginning of Bhagavatam, that if we observe Varnashram Dharma, we observe all varieties of Dharma. But if that hasn't resulted in any taste for Harikatha, it was all labor. In other words, it was all fruitless. The purpose of all revelation, the purpose of consciousness itself, the purpose of life, it is all to hear of him, to serve him. And so we are existing in this illusioned state, and on our own we don't have any means of coming to know him. Right? Maya mugdera jeev nahi swata Krishna gyan, or in another variant, nahi Krishna smriti gyan. The jiva bewildered by Maya, it cannot know him. That is only comes to be known by his agency. This is why the Vaishnavas, although they like to strongly emphasize the dualistic aspect of their teachings, are still Advaitavadis. Right? We have to remember, the Vaishnava, we're still a member of the Advaita school. Right? But we are, we recognize that the simultaneous existence of dual and non-dual reality. But this point is very important to keep up. Otherwise, gradually the system of thought degrades. If we don't realize that every degree to which we come in connection with Krishna, it requires his agency, it requires his consent. To hear of him, he allowed you to hear him. To serve him, he gave you that seva. To know his devotees, he sent you his devotees. To give you seva to his devotees, he gave you that opportunity. To have a guru, he's your guru. To get a mantra from a guru, he gave you that mantra. Right? It is his agency that is actually pervading all of these other channels. So as the sun is seen by his own light, we get connection with him to the extent that he wills it. In that sense, it is one absolute reality conditioned by one. And effortlessly, of course, he's delegated that to function, but this point is to be maintained. So, to come in connection with that absolute reality, that highest agency, by way of any means, but specifically by the opportunity to conceive and then willfully reciprocate, that is itself grace upon us. Grace is not like necessarily a smile or some warm greeting and knowledge is another thing, right? But actually the grace is the knowledge, the grace is the connection. Exactly the manner at which it was distributed, that's secondary actually. And with that, then we can receive that and take it seriously in our life. And unless and until we do, everything is sitting and waiting. This is the point of avoiding the 10 offenses to Harinam. That the price to pay for not Krishna consciousness, we say Krishna consciousness is not our goal, because the term Krishna consciousness gets appropriated for the slackening notion of Krishna bhakti. That I have Krishna in my life, therefore I'm Krishna conscious, bas. This is not the goal. The goal is Krishna prem, not Krishna consciousness. To be aware of Krishna in the generic sense, that's good, that's a start, that's not the goal. The goal is Krishna prem. And Krishna prem means, uninterrupted, constant endeavor to satisfy Krishna without any selfish interest whatsoever. In the words of Guru Maharaj, it is the ideal achieved at the expense of all else. And why is it then? Why would we risk everything, so to speak, for that ideal? Why would that thing be so valuable? What will give us sufficient motivation to make that type of concerted effort in our life? We need to hear about that. We need to understand that. That's the most urgent thing in our life. Not even any of the practical activity meant to support that. That sense of urgency and a hunger in our heart and mind, moment to moment in our life. That is the vitality. Tatra lovyamapi mulyamekalam janma koti sukriter nalabhyate. 10 million lifetimes of proper regulated devotional practice will not get you this thing. Right? But the intensity of heart and hankering, which already would have burned any other so-called prospects, hobbies, aspirations, habits, blah, 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 away. This intensity of hunger, it is awakened by one thing, Harikotha and Sadhu Sangha.
So Maharaj, we have here something also from
What?
Ashrama Maharaj. Yeah.
Sure.
It's 3 o'clock.
It was a very perfect presentation.
Very nice.
It's amazing.
Maharaj, you've been asked to speak.
But finish. They time to finish.
Is that okay? Yes or no? Okay, well, I don't want to go on too long. Certainly everyone would like to take prasadam and hear from Raj. So I'll just, on this theme, then we can say the urgency of hearing about Krishna, to awaken that hunger in our hearts, that is what we need in our life. So to hear, to participate in kirtan, to participate in harikatha, this is so necessary. So rather than only talking about doing that, very shortly I'll give one tiny dose of that, and then I'll stop. Right? So one particular verse that for me I've always find is creates some appetite, so to speak. It's this. It says, it's given by Jiva Goswami in a couple of places. He says, Shristadikam harer naivana prayojanam apekshate kurute kevalanandad yatha martasya nartana. Which says that Hari has no particular objective to achieve by the creation, the maintenance, or the destruction of the universe. He has nothing to achieve by doing all of this. Now, we might say, well then why would you take on such a big task? Right? Then, if we ask that question, then we don't get who is Hari. Because the second line says, Kurute kevalanandad. He does everything he does purely out of bliss. His every act is not the pursuit of Ananda, it is an expression of Ananda. This is who Krishna is. That being whose every act is almost a self-forgetful act of ecstatic bliss. So much so that people exist who aren't in that state of being is forgotten. And that's why people in the world suffer. In other words, if this problem of evil, why does evil exist if God is there? This is one way it's dealt with by Jiva Goswami. The reason Krishna doesn't stop all the suffering in the world is because he doesn't know it's happening. Because he's in too much ecstasy to remember. So shall we fault him for that? Hey, come on! Come out of it now! Rather, it says, Yatha martasya nartanam. His every movement is like the dancing of a drunk. Sorry, that's what it says, directly in the Shastra. His every movement is like the dancing of a drunk. In other words, one who's self-forgetful and acting naturally out of joy. So that is what it means that he can attract even the Atmaramas. This type of spontaneous behavior. This is actually the birthright of every living being. Or not the birthright, but the blessing, or the blessing that everyone who's been born, in other words, who exists, can ultimately achieve or receive. And if we can bear in mind that such a bright prospect, such a joyful opportunity is there to be realized through these simple, joyful practices of bhajan, then what more shall we aspire for? What else shall we hold in our hearts? Hare Krishna. In that spirit, let us chant. Okay, forgive me for going on too long.
No.
Then I have to speak. But when Maharaj was explaining about this, try not to be touched by it. I was thinking, well, maybe there is some consideration of trying not to bathe. Same for my face. Trying not to bathe by it. Yes. That will be a little more generous. A little more generous. There is one sloka that Srila Govinda Maharaj liked, as I am acquainted with. And it is not exactly a sloka, but it is in the Prapana Jivanamrita, no? And that is, he made that book with a little title for each sloka, describing the essence of that sloka. And
Aphorisms.
aphorism. And there is, I cannot quote the factual verse, but the translation, it says, of that aphorism, it's like 3 or 4 slokas from Bhagavatam, but his presentation of the essence of those slokas are very beautiful. And Srila Govinda Maharaj always used to give that sloka as a very good way to adjust ourselves during this practice of Krishna consciousness. And he said that the translation, let me see if I can remember. Maharaj may even know that sloka. Says, in the heart of those which the devotional seed has been planted, who are selfless and penitent, and who denounce their inability to leave aside the sense gratification, even though they know it is the cause of their suffering. And who keep practicing their devotional activities in the heart of those, I don't know if I'm losing some, in the heart of those personalities, the Lord will rise like the sun, like the rising sun, morning rising sun, and will dispel all their miseries, all their into ashes. It will burn all their reactions into ashes.
It also mentions that they have these, we'll say, anarthas or things in their heart which they are unable to necessarily get rid of, but that they despise them.
So naturally, this type of verse, maybe one is using them to foment my own complacency, no? And allow me to keep in the bathing of the stool, no? But they are nevertheless very hopeful for any practitioner in any stage of their of their practice, of their life. And like that. It gave us a little bit of hope, because naturally sometimes we are seeing, I am just like, bathing in this tool.
Knowingly drinking poison, but yet Shuddha Habe Mana, Kabe Hamahe. Like this, that Prabhupada used to say, hope against hope. It seems like such an insurmountable situation, yet that hope, that deep hope is not abandoned ever.
When you're talking about the Lord appearing in their heart like the rising sun, we also hear that those anarthas, those misgivings, those unwanted things, they're compared to ice, which is very hard to break, hard to chip away, etc. But when the Lord will actually appear in one's heart like a rising sun, then all those things will simply melt, they'll dissolve. Now that's something in relation to that actual verse of how the Lord can rise in one's heart and all the misgivings will go away.
Nevertheless, I am seated just by the side of Maharaj, and he has given a very good explanation of the essence of what our guardians have presented. And naturally, when I hear these things presented in such a way, at least I have to say, he's very courageous.
Yes.
One who can speak like that and can present these teachings and give honor to the efforts and life giving the efforts, so many stressful conditions they have tolerated and they have come. Naturally, they are. One cannot but feel well better, listen and some of that thing in your heart and not protest, but to accept something or as much as you can of what a person like Maharaj is saying in a lecture like today. I just came from India. We were there in India with Srila Janardhan Maharaj, with Tyagi Maharaj, who were, partaking of a room because there were so many people. There are some insufficiency and so many attending the festival of Gaur Purnima. And we were 3 of us there in the room. And many Bengali devotees were like in the corridors, in the roof, in the temple room, everywhere. And that may be some indication that the festival was very successful. And nobody complained. It's incredible. Nobody complains. They accept such discomfort. And everyone is very ready in the morning for the Mongol Arati and then going, very beautiful. These days, really, one would like not to be finished. Sometimes in our meetings, I'm sure, also in Govinda Mela last year, and it will come this year also, at the end, if you give the word or the chance to speak to some of the devotees who participate, that give us some thought about these days we all spend together. You will hear, believe me, every time, no, without doubt, without doubt, without fail, you will hear, oh, I wish these days would not be finished.
Yeah.
And that they will go forever. No? Because we forget about anything else. In the company, and devotees giving us shelter and prasad, and the opportunity to come and have the darshan of the deities and hear the devotees, their humor, their, trying to make ourselves, trying to give us the medicine, in the most accessible way. In the most accessible way. So when we are in these parikrams, really, it's like you wish, I hope this will never would end. There is nothing, just walking. And there are very long walks. Like when you go in a plane or in a bus and your destiny is very far away, and then you just worry free of anything. It's a long way still to my destination, so like that. Very nice. We had this, as always, the visiting of the different places, holy places of Mahaprabhu, and how Srila Jiva Goswami is taken by the hand and shown all these places by Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And we change a little bit the order of the parikram, because we are established. Maharaj is doing the last two parikramas not from the Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat of Navadvip, but from a temple he built in Nishinghapal. And the temple is quite big. We don't have a temple like that in Mexico. As you want to speak, it's very big. But it's still very insufficient for the amount of devotees there. So we need to share the best possible on the rooms and the spaces. Then we stayed there with Srila Acharya Maharaj in the personal company of Janardhan Maharaj, of Tyagi Maharaj. Many devotees came from all over the world. Anjali was there. She says she never wants to miss one of these parikramas. And Janardhan Maharaj was with, if I can say that, but he was with pneumonia in China. And I was thinking maybe Maharaj is not going to be able to come. But miraculously, the Chinese devotees did some arrangement and brought Maharaj to the hospital for 6 days to have him, with IV, antibiotics, IV treatment.
Yeah, the good thing is I didn't have to stay in the hospital. All I had to do was go there every day, get the IV drip, and then go home.
Then at the time, because always happens at the time when everyone more or less gets a little affected by the viruses, by Krishna consciousness, as Srila Maharaj would say, when everyone gets a little sick, ill, there at the festival. That part of the year in India is oneself is very susceptible to get sick. The change of seasons and so many, allergy or something, and so many people and everyone not so close together one each other, and we go anyhow.
For sure, the flu season.
The flu season. But Maharaj was looking like a Superman, because he was just coming with 6 days of intense treatment to make him able to come and assist for the festival. Then we all were sick in the room, except Maharaj. Also Acharya Maharaj, he was not ill. No, he kept, certainly I have to say, he was looking very good, his health. Not like in other years, recent years, he was looking not so well in his health. But today, this year he was looking very well, and very happy doing the kirtan all day long, then arriving at the temple and giving 2 hours lectures for the Bengali devotees, and very beautiful. And we wish this at those times, the natural sentiment that comes to our heart is that I wish this thing will not ever end, and we will all keep like that. anyhow, it is. This calendar, devotional calendar, is helping us very much, no? Because barely we have left to celebrate one festival, no? And then